What is going on, everyone? I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic today. Welcome to my fish studio, aka some random corner in my living room. I like to call it the fish studio because it sounds cooler. Today we're going to be talking about Vallisneria, which is one of the fastest growing plants in the hobby, but it's also one of my favorite plants, and I think it looks absolutely stunning. I love it. I'm a huge fan of it, and we have a lot of it in this tank. But this tank is also in dire need of a trimming, so what not better way to do some maintenance on this tank while I talk about my favorite plant and why I love it. Let's get it. We have cleared all of the floating plants, at least most of them anyway. There's still duckweed. I mean, what can you do? I found duckweed in my coffee this morning. There's no getting rid of it. But all of the water lettuce and frog bit has been removed. And as you can see, I mean, the Vallisneria on its own is providing ample shade for the fish in here, which that in itself is one of my favorite things about Vallisneria. I really love how, even though it's a stem plant, um, it it covers and provides shade for fish, and it's such a stunning plant, honestly, especially when you grow it in quantities such as this. It really does look absolutely gorgeous, and I love it. But yeah, look at that. That is roughly 3 feet long at this point. For reference, all of this Vallisneria in here is planted in the very back, and this is a relatively tall tank. It is a 20-gallon, so that kind of just gives you some context just as how tall this plant can get. And I would love to do like a 200-gallon or something, like a really tall tank, because I want to see just how tall this Vallisneria can get, because clearly this tank isn't doing it justice. So Vallisneria is obviously a gorgeous plant, I mean, at least in my opinion, and it covers the water, it provides shade for fish, which is highly beneficial. But on top of that, I always recommend it to beginners because it is insanely fast growing and easy to grow. It grows incredibly well in nutrient-rich substrate. I'm using aqua soil capped off with sand, and it's growing incredibly well. But all that being said, if you only have sand or gravel, you can still actually grow it, and it'll do pretty well. I highly recommend putting root tabs in the substrate, but yeah, it'll grow. On top of Vallisneria being incredibly fast growing, obviously, it's incredibly cost effective as well. If you can buy one pot of Vallisneria and like break it up into 3 different stalks and then just, spread that in multiple corners of your aquarium, before you know it, it's going to create that jungle look on a budget. So yeah, if you're a first time planted aquarium enthusiast and you want to get into the hobby, but you don't want to drop hundreds of dollars on a selection of plants, get a pot of Vallisneria, get some contra soil, cap it with sand, and it's going to grow like crazy. As of the time that I'm making this video, it had been about a month since I had set up this tank. When I had first planted the Vallisneria, it was about here, and it is now completely coming up and bowing down, which is super cool. So yeah, that just gives you a reference of just how fast it grows. And right here, as you can see, we have runners that the plant shoots out to propagate itself. So growing through the hardscape here and coming to the front, just to give you some context of just how far these runners get sent out. It's absolutely insane, and it's just such a cool plant to watch take over the tank. It has pretty much doubled in quantity since we planted it, and there's just so much going on in here. It's honestly insane. Um, so as much as I love the look of this Vallisneria, we're just going to give it a little trim. I do also like having floating plants in here, so when we have the Vallisneria covering the water along with the floating plants, we're double breaking the light, and a lot of the plants down here are just not getting any light at all. So let's give it a trim. So for this particular tank, since it's relatively tall, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut the Vallisneria right at the curve where it starts to cover the water. I find that this works best for me. Usually when I cut it like midway down, the entire leaf ends up rotting and just falling off. So yeah, I'm not really sure why Vallisneria does that, but that's what it does. So every time I make a clean cut at the top, I find that it doesn't happen as much. So let's go ahead and give it a trim. The Vallisneria is now trimmed. We have the floating plants back in there, and there's a lot more light being let in there now. So these bottom plants should now be getting the light that they need. So it's also worth mentioning that when you trim Vallisneria, it will start to grow more densely. Basically, when you trim it, you're sending messages to it that it needs to reproduce. You're basically sending it into emergency mode. So I hope you all enjoyed this video and found it somewhat informative. If you haven't tried Vallisneria out in your aquarium, definitely give it a go. It's one of my favorite plants. It's incredibly easy to grow, and it's great for beginners. So yeah, if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. So yeah, peace.